All right, thanks so much for coming. For those of you I don't know, my name is Brian Levy, and along with Scott Nestler and Ken Milani and Jessica McManus, Warnell, excuse me, I always get the McManus part, not the Warnell part, and a host of others. Welcome. I have responsibility for Ethics Week, so welcome. Thanks to our sponsors, the Mendoza College of Business, the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership, and Chase Bank. This is the 22nd annual Ethics Week, and the theme this year, some years we have a theme, some years we don't. It's economic inequality on campuses, in communities, and at companies. And tonight is the on campuses part. Okay, and I think most of you, especially the people in this room, you're all sensitive to this. I think for generations, many Americans have thought of higher ed as a ticket to a better life, but as you all know, perhaps better than anyone, that ticket is sort of ever more expensive. So, the question is, what are college administrators doing to make sure that higher ed continues to be a ladder to shared economic prosperity and not a barrier? And so who are today's speakers? They are some industry experts in this area that we are very glad to have. We're not going to read their bios, as impressive as they are, in the interest of time, but they're on the Mendoza website if you're interested. So who do we have? First, we have Bob Monday. He's the Director of Admissions for Notre Dame. We have Mary Nucciarone. She is the Director of Financial Aid. And we have my good friend Mark Burdell. He's the former Director of the Office of Student Engagement. And the concept here was, we sort of invited them a long time ago and then talked about it a little bit more recently to ask Bob, what are colleges doing to sort of cast a wider net of some non-traditional students? Mary, how do colleges make it affordable? And then with respect to Mark, once they're on campus, there are still costs for students. How do we make sort of day-to-day life accessible? And I guess just one more thing I'll say. Again, even though they all work for or have worked for Notre Dame, we've really sort of asked them here in their capacity as industry experts with respect to higher ed generally. So they're going to talk about colleges generally, they're going to talk about Notre Dame some. To the extent you have very specific questions about Notre Dame, hypothetically, if your son's a junior in high school and you want some advice about admissions, okay, let's save those for offline. So with that, please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. Again, my name's Bob Mundy, and I'm the Director of Undergraduate Admissions here. So for the undergrads who are here, you've had some contact with me. I also realize that at this stage in your life, I'm a lot like yesterday's newspaper. Not a whole lot of value left, I'm afraid. But I understand that. I will, I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I'm actually a first-generation college student many years ago. Came to Notre Dame in 1972 and then spent some time teaching before I came back and began my work in admissions, and obviously motivated by a great deal of joy and pleasure that comes from working with high school students and young adults. So that's been, fortunately, I've got to work in an area where I have a great deal of passion. When we talk about the value of a college education, there is considerable research that clearly shows the monetary value of that over a lifetime, a college graduate is likely to earn probably $1 million or more over a non-college grad. But there's a lot of other value that, and certainly as Notre Dame undergrads, I hope you're feeling this. There's a lot of other value to a college education. Not the least of which, and certainly this is not an exclusive list, but college graduates tend to be more engaged in significant social issues. They tend to have lower unemployment rates. They raise children who are more likely to go to college. So again, there's a lot of social good that comes out of being the recipient of a college degree. Incidentally, if any of you happen to know any of my staff, please tell them that I was working off electronic notes, because they rightly understand I'm electronically challenged. Right. But this is what I'm learning to do these days. If colleges are are truly to become instruments of positive social change, then it's responsibility of all colleges and universities to seek students who might come from backgrounds that are more economically challenged, so students from lower socioeconomic situations. And the good news on this front, as we talk about making college more accessible and I suppose getting at the ethics of it all, is this population has become highly sought after by just about every one of my colleagues in the profession. So the good news is this has become a pretty high-profile interest of, again, most every college that I've known. The challenge is getting students from that background interested, getting them into the process. And there are a lot of reasons that they would be less likely to do that. But one thing we do know about students from these lower socioeconomic backgrounds is they tend to go to college at a lower rate. Students of comparable academic backgrounds tend to enroll at a lower rate if they're from challenged economic environments. And some of that, and Mary will address this, is the fear of the cost. That college is an expensive venture, and under really any circumstances. And when you're from a family whose annual income might be $30,000 a year, and you're looking at colleges where a full cost of attendance is more than double that, that's a daunting prospect. And that's where professionals like Mary Neutroni and obviously some of our admission staff as well, we have to overcome that. We have to look, that's obviously what would be called the sticker price. The net price to you could be very different from that. And that's the challenge that we have. The other another interesting characteristic of students who come from similar backgrounds is that they tend to, and this is a phrase that's probably been overused a little bit, they tend to undermatch. They tend to attend colleges that, given their academic credentials, they could have gone to perhaps a more selective institution. So there's a lot of education that has to occur while these students are in high school. The way that we as a profession have gone about attracting these students has been to partner with a number of CBOs, community-based organizations, because again, this has become such a national focus. We have organizations like QuestBridge or Matriculate or relationships that we've developed with the Cristo Rey High School Network, and there are dozens of such programs out there. And then there are also foundations like the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation, which happens to raise funds for, again, for first-gen students or first-generation students, or for students from more challenged economic environments. So there are opportunities out there to help students from these backgrounds. So there's no excuse for colleges to not be making these efforts. Specific to Notre Dame, and we've had relationships with one organization, a relationship with one organization called QuestBridge for about a dozen years now. And QuestBridge is an organization that focuses on students who are first-gen college goers or students from, again, lower socioeconomic background. And their draw, and they've become one of the more prominent organizations. They have 40 partner colleges. Again, we are one of them. They go through this matching process, and it's based on the matching process that's done for medical doctors when they match for their residencies. And if you match for a college, that means the college has been, they are ready to offer admission to you, and you've also been vetted through the financial aid process and have been determined to be eligible for a fully funded need-based financial aid package, which would include no student loan. Is that correct? So think about that. The Notre Dame price tag at $70,000, and all of a sudden you learn as a Questie, as they call themselves, that you're now your annual cost to attend Notre Dame from your family is effectively zero. And that's a big, as you can imagine, that gets students' attention. The other good piece of this is there will be students who are wonderfully academically talented and qualified, who will be able to be admitted, who aren't quite at that level where they have zero family contribution, but they're still in these challenged environments, so their cost to attend Notre Dame might be $4,000 a year. So there's this great avenue that gets created, and the QuestBridge organization attracts thousands and thousands of students each year into their under their umbrella, if you will. And as members, as one of their partner schools, we get to participate in 3 annual conferences where they will have some of their rising seniors come to this conference and attend, so we get to meet them. We also partnered with 3 other colleges last spring with our colleagues at Vanderbilt, Yale, and Colorado College, and we did a week-long tour focusing strictly on QuestBridge students. So we invited all the students from the QuestBridge organization who were in Oklahoma City or in El Paso or Albuquerque. We did a sort of a tour of the Southwest. And those programs were terrific, and they were well attended, and the students were absolutely focused, and was a great reminder that this is an organization with great potential. And this year we'll probably enroll between 80 and 100 students who have come to us initially through that QuestBridge organization. So there are ways to again, get over that obstacle of getting students into the process. Once here, and here generically, once in college, we know these students are in a little different environment than perhaps they've experienced before, and they may need some different kind of support. And Notre Dame's been very good, and Mark will address some of this later. Notre Dame's been very good about addressing the notion that it's not just getting you here. It's making you feel comfortable here, helping that comfort level, because when you're comfortable, you'll certainly be more successful. So we're very fortunate at this institution that again, I mentioned at the beginning that colleges should be instruments for positive social change. I can't think of a better example of that than right here at Notre Dame. And again, as a graduate and as someone who's worked here, I've never had any problems doing my job. There are days, obviously, but for the opportunities that we can create, it's truly exhilarating every day. And again, some of it's my own bias. This was me. You know, first gen, 5th of 6 kids. College was not commonly discussed around our dinner table. But I knew that opportunity existed. One quick anecdote, of the 6 Mundy children, only one of them never spent a day in Catholic school. That was me. And yet from about age 10, all I wanted to do was come to Notre Dame. Now, you shouldn't let 10-year-olds make decisions like that. They're not qualified to do that. It ended up, first of all, because they have outrageously challenging expectations. They have expectations that could never possibly be met, and yet by the time I got here at age 18, they really were. So again, we're in a wonderful position because of our terrific ability to offer financial aid, to have the passion among my staff when they are out recruiting students to be on the lookout. We task them with each week of travel, find at least one community-based organization in one of your cities, in one of your locations, and begin a relationship there. So we really are making efforts. The good news is we're being successful. Other colleges are also seeking these students, so opportunities are opening. And again, that makes me getting into my office every day really very exciting. So that's that's sort of the background from admissions, and I think we'll now sort of chronologically move through to what happens next.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for coming to all of you. It's great to see this many people who are interested. As Brian said, I'm Mary Nucciarone, and I serve as the Director of Student Financial Aid at Notre Dame. Unlike Bob, I also serve, our office also serves graduate students and professional students. So while we're in the undergraduate enrollment, we work with all students who are on campus. I myself also was a first-generation student, and so I have a passion and a desire to make sure that students who have academic ability to attend college get that opportunity. And I think part of the message, I'm not going to make a lot of comment on it today, but it's also helping students and families to understand that there is a really wide range of post-secondary education. And it's good that there's hyper focus on college and four-year degrees, but I think that for many students, there's also really a place for post-high school to go into trades or certificate programs or associate's degrees. And again, I think there's a little bit more research coming out on that topic, and hopefully we'll hear a little bit more. I'm going to focus my comments around first definitions, because I think we use words and they mean something different to everyone. I want to talk a little bit then on affordability, talk about ND, and also other schools, kind of what climate do we set in higher education, and then give you some stories or issues where I think we have made progress, which again, Mark's going to talk a little bit more about, but I think we still have a ways to go. So when I think about economic inequality, I look at several types of economic inequality that I observe here at Notre Dame. And they primarily come from income inequality, and that can be a particular gender making less money than the other gender, or it can it can also come from wealth. So some of what's interesting in what I see, and kind of like Bob, I've done this for lots of years. And what I've seen over time is a real change in incomes rising, although they're not keeping pace with inflation. So but I would say when I first started in student financial aid, when I saw someone with an income of $100,000, we thought that was a really wealthy person. Now I hear middle income, and when I ask people what that is, I get anything from $20,000 to $350,000. So think about when you hear middle income. That's not my definition. I'm not going to answer that question for you, but just know we hear a lot of information, particularly in the public press, about middle income, particularly related to higher education. And I think it's a really difficult conversation because there's so many differences. I want to start with poverty. What is poverty? And people in poverty are those who are considerably worse off than the majority of the population. They are unable to access goods, services that most people consider necessary to an acceptable standard of living. Poverty is most often an absolute term, referring to a level of deprivation that does not change over time, or a relative term in which the definition fluctuates with changes in the general standard of living. And it may be surprising to you, but we do have students from poverty. And I'm not going to go into income levels, but when I look at that definition, I definitely can tell you that many of the students that I work with are students from poverty. Inequality, by contrast, is actually a relative term. It refers to the differences between levels of living standards in incomes across the whole economic distribution. In practice, Poverty and inequality often rise and fall together, but that doesn't need to be the case. Inequality can be high without high levels of poverty due to a large difference between the top and the middle income of the spectrum, right? And so what we hear often right now is rich are getting richer, poor are getting poorer. That's where this definition, I believe, goes. So again, I think it's really important that within this context of higher education, that we think about what economic inequality is, and even in the micro of the University of Notre Dame. I also want to use share another phrase that we hear a lot, and I know Mark, particularly as the Office of Enrichment was coming up, not knowing what to call it or who the office would serve, we often hear terms, and we benchmark with many other schools, about students from particular backgrounds, and the words were low socioeconomic status. So, like, what does that mean? But it is one that we hear frequently. So in looking at the National Center for Education Statistics, they would define low socioeconomic status as combining both economic as well as sociological factors as a total measure of a person's work experience, of an individual or a family's economic and social position as it relates to others. So it's not strictly income, right? When we talk about low socioeconomics, it might come into bringing also into level of education. So I'm not saying that all first-generation students are from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and not all low socioeconomic background students are necessarily first-generation students. When analyzing a family's socioeconomic status, the household income and the earner's education and occupation are considered, as well as combined income. And then while Bob was talking, I also jotted down a few other words. So the press is big on, particularly for institutions like Notre Dame, enroll more Pell Grant eligible students. So as a director of financial aid, I will tell you that most people think all Pell Grant eligible students are of poverty or are of low income. That isn't true. And I won't go into great detail about it, but there are people, because of my friend Ken in terms of tax law well knows, there are legal ways for people to suppress their income. I'm not saying they're doing anything wrong, but I could have someone who is a large wage earner of $300,000 who has a loss on their tax return that can bring their income down into Pell Grant eligibility because it is simply based on adjusted gross income on a tax return. When we see some of those cases, there's typically a lot of wealth that goes beyond that, yet they fit a federal formula that says they're Pell Grant eligible. So using that as a proxy is really problematic for me when we're measured. And using percentages of student enrollments is also really problematic because some of the comparisons, if we look by strict numbers, you might rise in the rankings, and if we use percentages, you're going to have schools fall in ranking. So that's not what we're here today, but I want to share with you that these aren't simple issues to just say you should do this and increase this population, because then it means someone else is left out. And if you're really geeks into education research, I'd say look at the work of Hauksbee and Turner. So they are great education researchers, first ones to come out and really push higher education, persons like Bob and myself, to really go after the low socioeconomic, the at-risk student, whatever we want to call them. They really pushed. Well, what, 3 weeks ago? Hauksbee and Turner said, you know, we might have gotten this wrong. And what we're finding now is there was so much focus on the Pell Grant eligible student. I kept saying, well, what about the kid? Because it's a strict. If your family contribution is this, then you get. Well, if you earn $1 more, I'm here to tell you, you could be out of the Pell Grant program. So it doesn't mean for $1 more you're wealthier. So that's another reason that measure is a bad proxy for how are we doing in terms of increasing socioeconomic diversity and decreasing the inequality. So with that definition, just kind of to think about, I thought it might be helpful, or we did actually, that it might be helpful to give you, this is on our website, this represents, they're gonna pass out just a handout. I'm not gonna go through it, but it can show you in the freshman class that entered fall of 2017, who was receiving student financial aid. And just know that you're going to look at incomes by decile, and it might appear to you that assets aren't in there, but they are because they're used in determining the gift eligibility that's on there. If I added the other grade levels to this chart, it would look very, very similar. So what we are seeing is a growth in the in all levels, but again, as we enroll different types of students, darn Bob, he won't let us enroll. It's not really just Bob, but we can't enroll more than a certain number of students, right? Because there's class size and different things. So I want to transition now into specific opportunities and challenges. Bob talked more about them, so I'm not going to repeat what he did. But I want to talk a little bit more focused about what does affordability mean. And it's not just about price. Affordability, and Bob mentioned this, is actually about investment. And I would argue that affordability is a consumer term, and we're not describing what higher education is correctly when we talk about it from an affordability perspective. This is really an investment because it should give, as Bob said, financial and social returns over a period of time. There is a significant issue of access unless the school, again, you can think macro or you can think micro, if the school does not have enough resources themselves to provide gift assistance to pay for college, which leads then into debt burden. So I'm a pretty conservative person in terms of debt as a means to access. And so again, just to give you an idea, when we say we meet demonstrated need and we remain need blind, while student loans may be part of the financial aid offer to a student, we philosophically are opposed to adding something like a federal parent loan. But I'll tell you, many colleagues, institutions, not mostly our peers, but other institutions are listing something like a federal parent loan on a financial aid notification, because then they can say, I've met your need. I think that's an ethical issue, in my opinion, to try and almost mislead a family, especially if there's not enough savvy in the household to understand the difference between scholarships, grants, loan in a parent or a student name. The small group of schools, there's only 66 in the country right now, including Notre Dame, that can say we are need blind and we meet full need. So what do the other schools do? Well, they practice, and this is not an indictment of those schools. This is an issue of resources. So the issue, what happens is a student is gapped. Their financial need is not met, and that's where we continue to hear about the growing number or rise in student loan book debt. As an aside, it's really not at the undergraduate level. If you look at the data, the bubble and the bursting of student loans is actually happening at the graduate level. It's in borrowers over the age of 24. So again, that's a talk for a different day. But again, keep in mind that affordability means something different to everyone, and it's really directed to the specific resources that the individual has. So as Bob mentioned, to get a student from a background, let's say they have a $30,000 income, to even consider, that parent doesn't want to break their kid's heart. So it might not even be in freshman, sophomore, in high school or junior year. We're already off their list. And so things like our pre-college programs or our students who are working in the Matriculate program, working, mentoring one-on-one are incredibly important because we have to reach down lower in terms of grade level to keep talented students from lower incomes, believing that they can go to college, making sure they're taking curriculum that's going to be competitive so they can get into college. So specific to Notre Dame, Bob already talked about the QuestBridge program. One of the things I'm really excited about is that we are doubling our number of matches this year, which is incredibly exciting. We're going, I think there's 42, 44, somewhere around there. So this will be the largest group of matched students. And as Bob said, what that means to the student is we commit to them 0 parent contribution for 4 years of education, and it can go up to their cost of attendance each year. So if we're roughly 72,000 times 4. And then we also actual books. So while we build a bit of excess money within their financial aid decision, we will also help them with actual books. And again, Mark will talk a little bit more about other things that students need. And health insurance, which I'm going to talk about. We pay for health insurance with scholarship. So that's a very exciting. Another program is Posse, and another program would be Ann Bryce. So again, if you want to learn more about those, our Posse comes from the city of New Orleans. And the idea is they come as a posse because they come from similar background and a geographic background. And they come, and there are posses all over the country and schools that partner with posses. Another thing that Notre Dame I've been really working on a lot is trying to prepare communications that are readable to students and their families. So if you're not familiar with the Fleisch Index, we run everything that we do through that index and get a readability scale. So we tend to here at Notre Dame, it might surprise you, to be verbose and complicated as academics, right? Well, kids and parents don't understand that. So we really need to be cognizant of that. And even I would challenge academic websites, right? If we're trying, and it's hard because I'm trying in my office to talk to prospective students, undergraduate students, and graduate. So trying to write for all those populations is really tough. But again, who's coming to your website or your materials to look at them and think about how complicated they are if that person's never had that experience before. So the other thing is language of financial aid. So let me give you a very quick example about that. A few years ago, someone came to my office to share with me that one of their residents in the residence hall never hadn't eaten for the first week of school. I was shocked. Why? Because we use a very antiquated phrase, room and board. Board came from years ago when the meal was served on a board. Why didn't we ever change that? Call it what it is. It's room and meals. So be cognizant of the language that we use. And so looking even at the language of financial aid, are we talking in words that families can understand? The other thing, again, in not mine, and I want to get back to what's Notre Dame doing, is I'd really encourage you to look at, there's a group called the Forward 50. So there are 50 of us who are selected on a national basis to look at public policy. And it goes from access, affordability, transparency, and accountability. And we've proposed a set. It hasn't actually launched yet. The live launch will be March 13th, where our proposals come out. But this is a group of practitioners, financial aid, admissions, faculty, presidents, student affairs people that are going to come out with a set of public policy that we think are important. Ken, I just have to tell you, the taxation of student financial aid made it through to that public policy recommendation. So I can only hope that it will go further. And then the other thing is what Bob talked about in terms of community organizations is us being presenters to their audiences. So the Talent Search, American Talent Initiative, doing presentations, helping their influencers become more knowledgeable is another one of the activities that you'll never see because we don't publicize that we do it. Give you an idea, our scholarship budget last year was $145 million in need-based scholarship. That doesn't include athletics, it doesn't include grants and aid, athletics, any of those, ROTC, any of those kinds of things. The scholarship ranges from $1,000 to full cost of attendance of over $72,000. Median need-based aid was $38,900 in gift. And our annual scholarship budget has just continued to increase, and much of it is funded through endowment or restricted type of gifts. We also have had a steady reduction in student loans. So if we looked at that, the line would be going down on a steady rate. Our commitment, the trustees want us to keep undergraduate debt below 10% of total cost of attendance. So we've been able to do that. We're running around right about $22,000 in need-based debt. The students from our lowest income levels receive no loan decisions. As I mentioned, Mark is going to talk about why we created the Office of Enrichment, and I'm going to turn the floor over to him in a minute. But I also want to talk with you just very briefly about, finding strategies to help a student pay for college is easier than identifying what I'll call the hidden among us, because it's really easy to hide, easier than you might think to hide in this community and not let people know that you don't have sufficient resources. So just some things you might not realize. We don't even know how many undergraduates lack health insurance. For those in special programs, we're paying for health insurance for those students, but the number of people I've made exceptions for has more than doubled in a year. I don't have a budget for that, so that's kind of problematic. So I have to keep making sure that I stay within budget so I don't have to stop providing a much needed service to students. We have a growing number of students who are coming from homeless backgrounds. They themselves have been homeless or their whole family has been homeless. We have more parents who are drug addicted, increase in the number of undergraduates who are victims of abuse and they are considered independent, the increase in the number of parents that is not restricted to economic status who are in federal prisons have increased. Students are using the Center for Social Concerns programming as their means of a way to get off of campus but have housing and meals during break time, not the way it was intended to be. I've had students share their anger with me stemming from class or residence hall discussions. They find themselves stuck in the middle of a discussion where poor people are being talked about in sometimes kind, sometimes ignorant ways. And what the people around them don't know is there's a poor person standing right in front of them. And they, a student shared with me, they went on a Center for Social Concern trip like that, and people were making fun of the people they were serving. And it was just like the person who was standing there who had used that trip as a means to just get away from campus for a week. The cost of textbooks now is going higher, and those homework codes, which you probably know a lot more about than I do, when I talked with Brian, he's like, Mary, I don't even know what you are talking about. Sorry to call you out. I've asked many more faculty, they have no idea. But you know what? The cost of those, some of you might pay for them and not realize it, but some of those codes range from $100 to $200. And then when you go try and sell the book, you can't really sell it back because it doesn't have the homework code. Students are being asked to pay for class materials in front of their peers by their faculty members, and they are totally humiliated and embarrassed. So if you have someone like that, they haven't paid, the likelihood that they haven't paid is they don't have cash and they don't have a credit card. There is a realization that everyone knows the same things. I taught Moreau last year. We reached out to our students and asked, and I've reached out to our lower income students and asked them, they don't know how to use a library and they're too embarrassed to ask. Their school library didn't have a resource librarian or a reference librarian, research, whatever. They have no idea what that person does as a job. So again, it's we make a lot of assumptions. And again, some of you may be in that, and I don't mean to offend you, but I just want you to know the story of students. Office hours are a mystery. Many students have no idea what one would do in an office hour because in their school, their teachers didn't have that, or their high school counselor was not there to counsel. They were there solving problems, not guiding them. Our DACA students, we do still have DACA students among us. They are still afraid to tell who they are because they have had people on campus. We've had people who are non-DACA come and say, I just had someone ask me if I was one of those, or tell me I should go back too. So again, these are some of the things that are existing. So while we can do a lot to bring people and give money, it's really, we have to change. We have to become aware of ourselves. I can only change me. But that's part of what I would tell you is there are kids who are here and they're persisting because they know there's an economic pay for them, an economic payout. And many students know this is an opportunity of a life that can change their family life. So I'm going to turn to Mark.
Thanks, Mary.
Sure.
Can you guys hear me? If I don't lean into the microphone, we'll just kind of put it here so I'm not knocking around on it. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? We're to the last speaker on the table. That's great. So my name is Mark Burdell, and I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be back. I think you need the little bit of the background, and I wasn't aware, but apparently it was a prerequisite to be a first-generation college student at the table, because all three of us are. I arrived at Notre Dame in 1983, and at that time it would have been called room and trays, because we just had trays we carried around the dining hall all the time. But my parents packed up the family car in Southern California and drove me to Notre Dame. And it was, a long drive, and we got here in August, and I'd heard all the stories, and they unpacked me in Kavanaugh Hall and took me inside, and my dad paid my $15 hall tax. There was a hall tax back then, 15 bucks. And that was the entire amount my parents were able to contribute to my education at Notre Dame. That was it. The rest of it, Mary knows, she's been doing this for a while, not quite that long, I don't believe. She's been doing it for a while. And back then it was different. You basically borrowed everything. So every semester I'd go in and sign my note and take my loan and go back to class. And you just worried about it when you got out. So what I'm gonna, the other thing, just a fun fact for all of you, coming from Southern California, and I know there's at least one other Southern California in the room, we'll get to her in a little bit. I had never seen snow fall from the sky. I had never seen that happen. I had gone up to it and played in it. That was about to change. Even last night, I can't believe you guys still have this much snow. So, but I'm back, and I'm just going to tell a story. And I'm going to be pretty quick, so we definitely want to get to questions and have a conversation about some of these things. So the story is basically how we took a look at this. I've worked, I graduated in '83, but I came back and had the fortune of working here at Notre Dame for almost 13 years, 12 and a half years. The first 10 were in the Alumni Association, but the last 2.5, I had the privilege of working with everyone here to build what is now the Office of Student Enrichment. And so what we did, we just went around and we talked to other universities and other colleges, and we just kind of figured out what was going on. And we knew we wanted to build the office, and we knew we needed to, but we wanted to find out what everyone else was doing, and then we want to kind of add the Notre Dame piece to that. So I went all over the country and talked to folks who had put together these types of resources and these types of offices. And we launched it in just after the beginning, like second semester of 2016. So we launched the office, and we had to kind of figure out what we were going to do. So what we did, to Mary's, she's already made the comment. I'm going to talk about socioeconomics a little bit, but I'm going to talk about kind of how we approached it. But who were we serving? That was one of the first things. What students are we trying to serve here at Notre Dame? And we didn't know at the time. We had a lot of other information, other university information, but we basically, we sort of put it together. And then we ran it for a while, and I'm going to open up with just some quotes from an exercise we did with some of the first students that we worked with a couple of years ago in the office. And this will frame for you kind of who we figured out we were serving later. We didn't know this in the beginning, but these were students we worked with. So it was very simple. We put a piece of paper in front of them, and we said, just fill out the following for us. I wish blank knew blank. So just, who do you want to tell something to? And these were just some of the answers, and we have lots of these, and they're fantastic. But so just some of them. I wish my mom knew how much I appreciate her sacrifices. I wish my family knew how much I miss them already. I wish my school knew how hard it is here for people to be different religiously, racially, and socioeconomically. I wish my biological father knew how successful my life has been. I wish my parents knew how stressful bouncing classes, practice, social life, and other responsibilities can be. So that ended up being some of the students we worked with. And I think that goes across socioeconomics. I think that goes across all students. I think there's truth for every student in some of these statements, and then there's unique truths as well. But to get started into it, we kind of broke out the word socioeconomic. So we took the socio side, kind of the social piece, the programming side of what we needed to be doing, and then we took the economic side. So in other words, the benefits. What are we going to provide to students who need things? We'll start with the benefits because everyone seems to want to talk about those first, right? What do you give the students, and what are the benefits, and what do they need? So we can talk about the benefits, but I'm going to break out what we learned as we got into that, and then I'll come back to kind of the socio side. So on the benefits, pretty quickly we figured out there were two types of benefits Notre Dame students need in general. First of all, the necessities, right? You're wearing them now, winter clothing. That's a big deal. We have a lot of students from all over the country, all over the world, who didn't own a winter coat. I was one of them. When I showed up, we would layer up and deal with it. It was great junior year. My roommate got a new winter coat because I got his old winter coat. It was fantastic. But winter clothing. Another one, laptop. You'd be amazed how many students either have never owned a laptop to this point, which doesn't sound feasible, but it is, or who have laptops that it would never hold the workload that a Notre Dame student faces. So laptops are an issue as well. There are some other things though. Medical expenses, dental expenses. When you show up in South Bend and you live here through cold and flu season, when you have a dental issue, those are just things we need to take care of for our students because it's just, you can't send them off, can't send them back home. If they get back home, maybe they don't have coverage for those things. And then the last piece, which was a little surprising to us, we figured out pretty quickly, emergency travel. So, whether there's a student that needed to have a parent come to campus or vice versa, a student that needed to get home for a reason that was going on at home. So those are kind of the basic necessities that many of us take for granted, but a lot of students don't have access to. The second type of benefit were the experiences, right? So if you're going to come to Notre Dame, there are going to be certain things that you're expected to take part in. First and foremost is football tickets, exactly. And so we were overrun in the beginning. We had no idea with hundreds of football ticket requests, right? That's not part of room and board. You have to pay for those. It's a great price, but they're still an expense. So football tickets. Some of the other things, conferences, seminars, retreats, those things cost money, right? We had to figure out how we're going to give students access to that. Hall events, right? There's hall dances, there's hall trips, there's all kinds of things going on in your dorm. And then student activities and clubs. There are, 500-600 student activities and clubs you can join. We always laugh because some cost $5 and some cost $850. That's the equestrian club, I think. Yeah, I still remember that one.
Without a horse.
That's right, and I don't even think that covers the horse, but I don't know, I never know. And then the last piece, if you're going to be part of the Notre Dame family, your family should get to come here for JPW, they should get to come to commencement. I mean, that's just a part of the college experience. You see where I'm going here? So it was kind of putting all this together, and those type of benefits, we had a long list pretty quickly, but then it was, so how do you get the benefits to the students who need them. How do you have a student feel comfortable having access to these things? So we tried a few things in the first year. I remember for the winter clothing, we gave 4 or 5 different ways a student could get winter clothing. You could just go buy your winter clothing if you had the money up front or had a credit card by chance, and then we could reimburse you if you were eligible. We would take it all the way to, we would take students shopping. Because maybe they don't have a way to get around South Bend, maybe they don't know where they're going, maybe they don't have a Burlington coat factory in Idaho. We did all the things that we thought students would need and that they would be comfortable in getting access to those winter clothes. So it wasn't just figuring out what they need, it was figuring out how to get them set up with that. All of this, and Mary's waiting to see if I remember this part from doing it, but all of this fell under financial aid. So Mary and I in our office, we would talk daily, many times, because if we go out and provide a benefit, it's got to be reported through your financial aid package. That's just how it works. So it was just quite a complex process, and we put the processes in place and we run with that. We also work with rectors and RAs for all the dorm events, access to the like the dorm t-shirts and hoodies and sweatshirts. We will work with the RA, the rector, on that, but the request we had was we really wanted the student to come to us or to ask us, just because we wanted to meet the student and have a conversation and let them know that what we were doing, we were just trying to make sure that everyone had access to the Notre Dame student experience. So that's kind of how we started off, and that sort of, we let that out there, and then it became pretty obvious pretty quickly with the benefits before I get to the programming side. The best case scenario would be students are here to become adults, they're here to learn things, they're here to become responsible and make decisions. So then we move to a model as well where we give them the money up front as part of a scholarship, and we let them decide. You make your choices. What, you want to buy your football tickets? The winter clothing piece, that's a little tougher. The parents coming in, we could supplement, but we really tried to give a scholarship and said, hey, fund your own Notre Dame experience. We don't have to provide it every time you ask us. So we came up with that model too. And I thought that was a great model. It was a little tougher. It's a little harder to identify the students. It certainly takes a lot of resources, but that was kind of the other model. And that program, just if there are folks in here who have heard of it, it's a Fighting Irish Scholars Program. It's still going on. I think it's changed a little bit, but that's kind of the continuum that we went through. And then now on the socio side, so the programming. We knew we needed to provide programming, not just benefits when students showed up. So the first year, we kind of talked to our other universities and we got some ideas. And the first thing everyone says was, you really got to teach financial literacy. Got to have financial literacy. Students need to know how much a pizza costs. They need to know how to use the post office, how to balance their checkbook, all these things. So we put together a financial literacy program, and rapidly, so quickly, that changed to Mary Nucciaroni helping us explain to students their financial aid package. But more than that, we got together and we narrowed financial literacy down to, how do you finance a 4-year Notre Dame or college education? Because there's 4 years to plan for, there's summers in between. You're just doing this the first year. How do you work towards a goal of as Mary said, get out of here with the right amount of debt, but also have a great experience? So we changed that program almost immediately, and we worked with Mary to take care of that. The next piece was peer mentoring. It was kind of the other buzzword. Got to have peer mentoring. We agree, and we did it, and it was a great program. But we learned pretty quickly as well that you've got to get the right set of upperclassmen with the right set of first-year students. There needs to be an understanding of, they've been through this. I see how they got there, but they have to be able to relate to that first-year student too. So maybe that second semester senior who really needs to get have their career path take off and get a job and do all their interviews, maybe they're not a great mentor for a first-year student. Maybe they are. We had a few, but we tried to hone in on what makes a really good peer mentor, that you can get to know each other and kind of work with each other's experiences. And then the last program, first year, that I'll talk about was just navigating college. As Mary said, what are office hours? How do I speak up in class? How does this grading system work? What happens when I get an F on a paper or I don't do well on a test, first quarter, things like that. So that was kind of the social side of things. So we're running out of time. I'm going to wrap up relatively quickly here. I think we learned that self-confidence was the key to success, right? Instead of trying to provide all these benefits and programs, which we did, we tried to work individually with the students to really talk about self-confidence. And if we could get a student in that position, they were very successful. So with that, I mean, I could go on and on. This is about an hour and a half presentation. The last thing I want to do, I've been cheating the whole time and you don't know it. I am the former director of the Office of Student Enrichment, but the current director of the Office of Student Enrichment, who worked with me every day to build this office, is over here, Consuela Howell. Consuela, thanks for being here. So she's going to fact check me after we're done here, but she is in.
You did
Great.
well. You did well.
What's your office?
The Office of Student Enrichment, 204 in La Fortune.
That's right, and you can walk in, you can set up an appointment, it's open all the time. So thanks for being here. With that, I will stop. Thanks so much for your time and thanks for having me.
Yeah.